Garon's officials were swamped with work, but no one went to bother Stephen. He spent a few peaceful days with Kim at the hotel. Tristan and Zane had been sent to the hospital to recuperate. Fortunately, their injuries weren't serious. They'd overexerted themselves and needed some time to recover. As the four ascenders, Warren, Shin, Mac, and Rory, they came knocking on Stephen's door a few days later and asking him to come down to the dining hall for a drink. Late into the evening, the table was filled with empty bottles of wine. It was a celebration, but also a farewell. Everyone would be going their separate ways soon. "What are you planning to do from now on?" Stephen asked. "The U.S. is big, and there's lots of places to visit." "We're not planning to stay," Max said. "We're going to find a secluded area and try to ascend within 10 days. That was sooner than Stephen had expected. Tempest Citadel stole our cultivation and drained our inner energy, but our bodies weren't damaged, Warren explained. Once we were freed from the cocoons and left our spiritual world, our bodies began to recover on their own. When we return to our peak condition, the energy fluctuations of our auras will trigger the laws of the heavens. If we overcome the trial, we'll leave the human realm and ascend to a higher plane. If we fail, we'll be struck by lightning from the heavens and vanish into thin air." Warren's tone was nonchalant, but it couldn't hide the danger of ascension. This was the fate of every martial artist. Gabriel had found the reversal array manual in the cave, so he wasn't in a hurry to leave. He decided to stay in the human realm and travel. Stephen didn't have a problem with that, but he would have to lay down some ground rules after the celebration was over. For example, prohibiting the mass murder of civilians. Before the Ascenders left, they were adamant about fulfilling their promise to Stephen. They'd passed down their Devour the Void technique, so it shouldn't be that hard to help him break through to the late stage of the Red Dust Immortal realm. Stephen needed to do two things. First, he would need to use the technique to absorb a large supply of energy. Each stage of cultivation responded to varying energy reserves. This could be accomplished by absorbing energy-rich resources. Second, Stephen would need to strengthen his mind to control the massive increase in energy. The Ascenders would conjure illusions for him to overcome and steal his heart. They'd been trapped in their spiritual world for thousands of years. Conjuring illusions was as simple as a wave of their hand. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, everyone filed out of the dining hall and returned to their rooms to adjust their condition to its peak state. The next morning, Stephen took Gabriel and the Ascenders to the largest military warehouse in Garon. The captain of the city guards hurried over to greet them. "What brings you here, Mr. Adams?" Stephen pulled out a brass token from his pocket. "This is a token from your king. He gave me access to this warehouse." The captain inspected the token. It was engraved with Garon's mascot, and Carson's signature was on the back. The token was real. The captain didn't know why Stephen was here, but he opened the door without a word. When the Ascenders went inside, they were astonished by the mountain of ores and crystals organized by attribute. Stephen was used to warehouses like these. He'd come across many of them in the Asura realm. Not to mention, the U.S. had an abundance of ores and crystals as well. Shin and Mac urged Stephen to activate the slits on his palm to absorb the energy from the ores and crystals. He did as he was told, and the slits parted into mouths. The Ascenders grabbed a handful of ores and crushed them into powder. The impurities disappeared in the process, and the essence flowed into Stephen's body through the openings in his palms. Energy surged inside him. A wave of pain coursed through his internal organs and his meridians. It didn't feel like pain from an injury. It was similar to sore muscles after a workout. Gabriel was sitting next to Stephen and watching him absorb the energy. He had the same technique, so he wasn't surprised by what he saw. Stephen was absorbing 1 ton of essence every minute, but there was at least a few thousand tons of essence in the whole warehouse. Rory was impatient. "It's too slow. Didn't you sign a blood contract with the Threadworms? Use their spiritual energy to increase the absorption rate." Stephen gathered the Threadworm's spiritual energy on his palms to enhance the absorption. Rory was satisfied when the rate increased by several dozen times. Several hours later, the warehouse was empty. Stephen felt like a water tank with punctures. If he circulated his inner energy, the energy he had just absorbed would sweep out of his body. The ice dragon whipped up a gust of icy wind and made him breathe in the chill of the air. His metabolism slowed down, and the energy he had absorbed froze. His body was stabilized. The next step was to improve his mental state. The Ascenders activated a teleportation array and dragged Stephen's spiritual energy inside. His surroundings blurred as a white light enveloped him. When the dizziness subsided, he found himself standing in the middle of an ocean of blood. The ground was covered with bones of other beings. The stench of blood was suffocating. There was mountains of weapons piled up around him. After years of erosion, their metallic luster had faded. "Your opponents will appear soon," Shin said. All you have to do is kill them. Don't lose your mind in an endless slaughter. Maintain your clarity and control over your body. Stephen wasn't sure how this was supposed to strengthen his mind. He'd faced many enemies before. How was this any different? The Ascenders didn't tell him anything else. A smile played on their lips as they walked away in the distance. His opponents appeared not long after, but when he sensed their presence and saw their appearances, he found it difficult to raise his sword. It was Kim, the 4 great generals and the guardians of Hellcrown Palace, the Empyrean Circle, the Leviathan unit, and their leader, Liam, Ezra, and the beasts he'd signed a blood contract with. They were his closest companions. They'd fought side by side many times before. Kim was the first to speak. "Stephen, why are you here? It's too dangerous. You have to leave." The Leviathan unit's leader spoke next. "Mr. Adams, don't let your guard down. The danger is lurking around every corner. Head back and leave this to us." Their voices, mannerisms, and concern were all too familiar. They were too real to be illusions. As they approached Stephen, blood began to stain his skin. This was a dangerous sign. He was drenched in blood. He'd become one of the illusory world and be trapped here forever. His main body in the real world would fall into a coma. The iridescent dragon anxiously yelled for him to get it together, but its voice couldn't project any sound. This was Stephen's trial. He needed to overcome it on his own to break through to the next stage. Stephen noticed the blood stain on his skin from the corner of his eye, and he remembered why he was here. He took a deep breath before looking up at the crowd. They weren't his family or his friends. They were illusions. If he didn't kill them, he would never see them again in the real world. Stephen's heart clenched when they screamed in pain. His resolve wavered, but he didn't stop. At some point, the crowd was replaced with a new set of illusions. They were young, middle-aged, or in the prime of their lives. Memories of the time they'd spent together came rushing back. Stephen tightened his grip on his sword and rushed at him. The flow of time was ambiguous in this space. The only thing he could do was kill his opponents until they stopped coming. After an unknown period of time, the ocean of blood shifted, and a familiar marine beast surfaced. It was the blue whale, his companion in the deep sea. The whale flicked its tail, drenching Stephen in blood and is dyeing his clothes crimson. "Stay still and become my next meal. Any resistance is useless. You're an outsider in this space. There's no exit." Stephen didn't reply. He leaped into the air and condensed a phantom of the Killen. It bombarded the whale with torrents of fire. Waves of blood loomed over the surface of the ocean before crashing to the ground. Humans are weak. Cultivation is wasted on your species. Your only valuable is food and manual labor. The whale's speech was becoming more and more similar to the Asora's. It was repulsive. Stephen threw his sword into the whale's blowhole. Blades of light tore its insides to shreds. The Killen followed closely behind and drilled into its hole. Its heat evaporated the whale's blood and ignited its skin. The whale burst into flames and vaporized the ocean of blood. Nothing was left except its ashes. Stephen's racing heart settled as silence returned to the space. The illusion was well constructed. It knew him better than he knew himself. If Tristan, Zane, or Killian were among his opponents, the trial would have become a fight to the death. The teleportation array activated and brought Stephen back to the real world. The Ascenders had looks of approval on their faces. They weren't surprised that he'd overcome his trial. "You've entered the late stage of the Red Dust Immortal realm. Do you feel any different?" Stephen felt like a bottomless pit had opened up inside him. He couldn't put his sensation into words. "When you reach the true immortal realm, you'll have to create a stimulated space inside your body and make it prosper," Warren explained. "Then you'll be able to extract power from your creation." "Isn't that the same as creating a world?" Stephen asked. "That's right. That's how the classification true immortal came to be. When you reach this realm, you're essentially a god. Creating is more difficult than destruction. In its initial stages of cultivation, cultivators use their techniques to eliminate their enemies. But the stronger they become, the fewer enemies they'll have. As their cultivation progresses, they'll begin to create rather than destroy. The simulated space a true immortal creates will thrive with vegetation and beings with intelligence. This process helps them comprehend the laws of nature and deepen their understanding of the universe. It sounds complicated, but this isn't something you need to worry about right now. You'll be on your own for the next breakthrough. No one will be able to help you. There's a possibility that you'll never progress to the true immortal realm. There are very few cultivators who reach this stage. After the Ascenders examined Stephen's condition and confirmed that there were no issues, they officially bid him farewell. "Thank you for your guidance. I wish you the best of luck during your ascension." Warren laughed. "You make it sound like we'll never see each other again. The truth is that the top of the pyramid is very small. If you reach the peak, we'll meet again. Our next encounter will depend not only on fate, but also on absolute strength." His voice faded, and the ascenders vanished, leaving Stephen and Gabriel alone in the warehouse. When Stephen returned to his hotel room, the first thing he did was give Kim a hug. The memory of her death by his hand in the illusion world was so vivid that he would never be able to forget it for the rest of his life. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Stephen slept like the dead for an entire day. When he woke up the next morning, he found Kim sitting at her desk, staring intently at her laptop. She'd turned the VIP suite into an office. Stacks of documents were piled on her desk, waiting for her to sort through. He could tell she'd pulled an all-nighter from her dark circles. "The 9 States Financial Group has its own employees. You don't have to oversee everything. You should go to bed." "The beginning of a project is the most important," Kim said. "I can't hand over the work until I've organized it. We don't have an endless supply of funds. I need to decide how much capital to allocate to each industry and what kind of company to set up, and a lot of other things." The more Kim explained, the more complicated the situation sounded to Stephen. It seemed he needed to bring in external capital to make this business easier for everyone. "I'm going to Warhawk today to get an army from them." "An army? For what?" "I'll be taking them to the Asura realm to pressure the Asuras out of hiding. They failed to occupy Tempest Citadel's territory, so there's a high chance they went back to their realm." Stephen had confidently told Killian that he would make this possible, but the US and Warhawk were enemies. There was no guarantee that they would agree to his request. He'd planned to discuss this with Warhawk's higher-ups after he left the Asura realm, but one thing had led to another, and almost 2 weeks had gone by. "How are you going to persuade them?" Kim asked. "They've been trying to get on my good side ever since we tested out our new weapon over the ocean, but asking for an army isn't that simple. I'm going to let them invest their capital in Garan. It'll make your work easier, and it'll be beneficial to the US if we become allies with them. The friendlier our relationship, the less likely they'll antagonize our borders." After Kim promised to go to bed in an hour, Stephen boarded a private jet from the military with Liam to the country of Warhawk across the ocean. The head secretary, Hilskin, led 3 higher-ups, Brent, Harris, and Sawyer, to the airport to welcome them. Stephen dressed to the nines and exuded a pressuring aura. It made him quite the intimidating man. Liam walked behind him. He was much more low profile. To outsiders, Stephen was in the spotlight while Liam was in his shadow. Hilskin greeted Stephen with a smile. "It's an honor for you to visit at such a busy time. Ever since we joined hands to protect the world from invaders, the economy of many countries has become much more prosperous. This is all thanks to you." His flattery had no effect on Stephen. He gave a generic reply and asked him to bring the administrative building for a private discussion. There was no time to waste. Killian was waiting for him. Stephen cut to the chase as soon as he took his seat in the conference room. "I need an army of genetically modified martial artists, preferably 500,000 or maybe 1,000,000. Another spatial rift is opened. If we don't get rid of the Asuras completely, who knows when they'll attempt an invasion again." Fear and panic crossed Hilskin and the higher-ups' faces. They'd witnessed how powerful the Asuras were. It'd be a disaster if they invaded a second time, but Hilskin couldn't offer up their strongest combat forces based on a few words. After extensive research and development, Warhawk's biochemical technology had greatly improved. Their genetically modified martial artists were more reliable at the borders than regular martial artists. "It's the duty of every country to work together against a common enemy, Warhawk included. We would love to lend you our assistance, but our factories are limited. Given the time constraints, we don't have the capabilities to provide such a large army. The genetically modified martial artists available have been assigned their respective responsibilities in the military, and it'll be difficult for them to step away from their duties. I hope you can consider alternative methods." The second Hilskin finished speaking, Brent, Harris, and Sawyer nodded in support. Stephen knew these cunning politicians wouldn't agree to it unless the benefits were laid out on the table. He cleared his throat and gave the speech he'd prepared on the plane. If Warhawk agreed to lend the US an army of genetically modified martial artists, then they'd receive permission to freely do business in Garan. If they refused, then Garan would be off limits for the next several decades. Garan was a small country, but they were a boundary between Warhawk and many of their allies. If Warhawk was restricted access to their ports, they would lose direct communication with them. Even though the last major war ended more than 10 years ago, conflict was still rampant across the world. Arms merchants from Warhawks and Maplewood took this opportunity to make a profit. Not only did they provide a steady supply of weapons, but they also sent genetically modified martial artists to join the conflict as overseas mercenaries. If the flames of war weren't extinguished, there would always be money to be made. Most of the countries in conflict with each other were on the other side of Garan. Warhawk's business associations also had many shareholders whose business involved mines in those countries. They couldn't lose such an important maritime transportation route. Hilskin had to protect their interests. A majority of his supporters were shareholders from the business associations. He needed their vote when election day came around. Don't be so serious, Mr. Adams. Of course we have to stand on the side of justice and defend our world. We were just hoping to reduce the number of martial artists who are divided among other countries. Warhawk's biochemical technology is one of the best, Stephen insisted. How about 200,000? Maplewood is your ally. You can ask them for support. Don't forget the spatial rifts appear randomly. If you miss the timing, don't blame me. I'll make arrangements immediately, Hilskin promised. The meeting ended in a rush. The higher-ups sent Stephen and Liam to the hotel next to the administration building and went back to the office to make preparations. It would be a sleepless night for them. It was a race against time. If they missed the deadline, the losses from losing access to Garan would be detrimental. As for Stephen, he was relaxing in his hotel room. The negotiations had gone better than he'd expected. How did you know exactly how many troops to ask for? Liam asked. They didn't negotiate more than once. Dr. Dalton estimated the number of genetically modified martial artists based on how many photos and AI chips were used. 200,000 troops sounds like a lot, but to Warhawk that's nothing. In the middle of the night, Hilskin called the shareholders of the business associations for a meeting to discuss potential projects to begin in Garan. According to the deal, Stephen had given them permission to expand their business. During the initial stages of the project, the business associations would be required to give their profits to Warhawk's national treasury to subsidize the production cost of 200,000 genetically modified martial artists to replace the army Stephen had asked for. The shareholders weren't pleased. Who did the sovereign think he is? Garan isn't the United States' territory. It's not its place to offer up another country. We already have businesses in Garan. It's natural for us to increase our investment. Why do we need his approval? The shareholders were too busy making money and weren't up to date with recent events. They hadn't heard about the destruction of Garan's mountain range. Hilskin brought them up to speed. Warhawk didn't have conclusive evidence to link the explosion back to Stephen, but they measured the radius of the craters using satellite images and inspected the concentration of nuclear radiation on the mountain. The radius of the explosion and the absence of nuclear radiation proved that the destruction was a result of the United States' new bomb. I advise you to treat the sovereign with respect. The U.S. and Garan are neighbors and allies. If you make a scene when you go to Garan, no one will be able to save you. The shareholders were terrified. Mr. Hilskin, please calm down. We were just complaining. We'll go along with your plan. With that, the matter was settled. A week later, an army of 200,000 genetically modified martial artists boarded transport ships to the United States' eastern port. Stephen and Liam went with them. If Stephen opened a spatial rift using his blade, it would take forever for the army to cross over to the Asura realm. They would have to enter one by one. Fortunately, Gabriel had mastered the reversal array. At midnight, everyone gathered at the training ground on the outskirts of Annapolis. It was a moonless night. Clouds covered the sky. Taking a trip to the Asura realm is a rare experience. I guarantee you won't be disappointed, Stephen said. Gabriel gave him a knowing look. Stop the modesty. I know you just want to rope in another helper. He lifted his sword and condensed its aura into an unusual pattern. As the streaks of light spread, the diagram shone brighter. It couldn't be maintained for long. The army hurried into the light, followed by Stephen, Liam, and Gabriel. The sudden appearance of a dense crowd in the Myriad Mountains scared the beasts on patrol. They scurried off to report to their superiors. The leaders of the beast clans came to the scene to gauge the situation. When they saw Stephen, they realized what was going on. Welcome back to the realm, Mr. Adams. You've been gone for a while. We were wondering when you'd come back. With these reinforcements, we'll be ready to launch an all-out attack on the Asuras. How are you going to do that? The Asuras are hiding above the clouds. My reinforcements have the advantage in numbers, but fighting in the air won't give us the upper hand for long. Stephen's goal in every battle was to minimize casualties. Victory meant nothing if you were the last one standing. The Asuras haven't set foot on the ground ever since the war ended. They're not going anywhere. That makes things easier for us. Fighting in the air isn't as much of a challenge as you think it is. Follow us. We have some reinforcements of our own. The leaders of the beast clans led them to the canyon. More buildings had been constructed since the last time Stephen was here. The design reflected the beast's wild and unruly nature. Some of them had shifted into human form and made a home inside the buildings. They were slowly developing into a civilization like the human realm. Massive, ancient beasts were wandering around the clearing. It didn't take them long to recover and regain their livelihood after the array was broken on the Asuras' mountain. Killian was standing off to the side with a group of familiar faces. It was Amanda and the orcs. Stephen was surprised to see them. Why are you here? Amanda grinned. Surprised? The key to winning a war is strength and wisdom. We are going to introduce technology to the beasts, and in exchange, we'll use their power to increase our cultivation. This was a deal that Killian had made with the orcs after the war. Human cultivators lacked strength, but their complex thinking and strategizing made up for it. The orcs borrowed power from beasts by summoning their spiritual energy, and they were able to enter the Asura realm through reverse summoning. Killian was impressed by the number of reinforcements Stephen brought. "You're just in time. We'll make our move tomorrow morning. While you were away, we asked the dwarves to produce artillery shells. They'll be completed by tomorrow. The bird-type beasts will fly your army above the clouds and drop the ammunition on the Asuras." Based on Killian's plan, he didn't need Stephen to take the lead. The orcs would lead the army into the sky. The Asura king had ordered Tardador to lead his team back to the Asura realm after they retreated from the battle in Garan. He understood the Asuras' limits. Nothing good would come of getting involved in a conflict between Tempest Citadel and the Ascenders. The sapphire necklace glowed and disappeared from around Tardador's neck. It condensed into the Asura king's avatar. We can't underestimate human cultivators. Their species is weak, and the Ascenders are different from normal humans. They wouldn't cross over to the human realm, right? Tardador asked warily. That depends on if Stephen can win them over to his side. Stephen had left a deep impression on the Asura king. That young man was a thorn in his side. He managed to mess up his plans at crucial moments every time. A few Asuras had returned to the ground to check on the situation in the Myriad Mountains. The army of 200,000 human cultivators instantly caught their attention. They hurried back to the canopy in the sky to relay their discovery. The humans are getting bolder and bolder. They're occupying our realm with the beasts. They'll be launching an attack soon. We need to prepare in advance. 90% of the Asuras had fallen in battle during the war. What preparations were there to make? The four chiefs turned to the Asura king for help. The Asura king waved his hand. The red mist filled the air. It condensed into 5 remaining guards at the lake. Their power came from the Asura king's blood. The lake had been destroyed, but their bones had survived. They'd been recovering their energy ever since the war ended. Davos and the other 4 guards knelt respectfully and apologized for failing their duty. "You did what you could," the Asura king said. He glanced at the chiefs. If someone were to take responsibility, it'd be these 4. It wouldn't be enough even if they died 1,000 times. The chiefs averted their gaze in fear. The Asura king ignored them and adjusted the direction of the canopy. It flew towards a building made of clouds. This was an eye-opener for the Asuras. They'd lived in this realm for countless years, but they had no idea that this mysterious space existed right above their heads. The door to the building opened. Armor and weapons flew past the entrance. Their auras were more divine than the Asura king's avatar. The Asura didn't dare to look at them directly. They kneeled on the ground. "Before I ascend to a higher realm, I relied on my armor and sword to fight off my competitors. As time passed, the equipment grew stronger. I buried them at the bottom of the lake, but to prevent them from falling into our enemies' hands, I moved them here." The Asura king's gaze swept over the small crowd before it fell on Davos. The chiefs have an authoritative position, but their cultivation is subpar. As the strongest commander of ancient times, you're the only one qualified to inherit this equipment. My only request is to protect the Asuras from extinction. Tardador, Spence, Kagan, and Drake had mixed feelings, but they didn't argue. Maybe the Asura king didn't approve of them, because they'd spent too much time competing over their tribes and neglecting their cultivation. When Davos put on armor and picked up the sword, his aura surged with divinity. It was like the Asura king himself had appeared in person. The night flew by and dawn arrived. A flock of enormous birds swooped into the sky with martial artists from Warhawk and headed for the canopy. The orcs were right behind them. Killian was on his mountain with his follower, Briar. The ice dragon maintained a certain distance from the beasts, with Stephen, Gabriel, and Liam on its back. Their role was to bring up the rear. Davos became the new commander of the remaining Asuras. This would be their last battle, and it would be a fight to the death. The Asuras used the clouds as stepping stones to reach the beasts. The birds' movements were erratic and unpredictable. They dodged their swords with relative ease. Davos pointed his sword at the birds. The blade extended and weaved between them. When it brushed against their martial artists, they turned into a mist of blood. Their bodies regenerated seconds later. Stephen frowned. "What happened to the artillery shells?" "The orcs are flying higher than the beasts," Liam pointed out. "I think Killian gave them to the orcs because he was worried that the beasts would get caught up in the explosion if the artillery shells detonated in battle." The martial artists specialize in close-range combat. The martial artists landed on the canopy, drew their weapons, and engaged in direct confrontation with the Asuras. Stephen asked the threadworms to create a barrier for them. They crushed the ores and crystals stored inside their bodies and covered the martial artists with a layer of energy-rich powder. Tardador saw through Stephen's little trick. He always got in the way at critical moments. Tardador led the 4 guards towards Stephen to get rid of him once and for all. The ice dragon flapped its wings, and a blizzard swept past Tartador and the guards, slowing their movements. Stephen slashed with his sword, and a blade of light tore through the air. Tartador instinctively ducked and narrowly avoided it. The guards weren't as fast. They raised their swords to block the blade of light, but it shattered their weapons and sliced them in half. Tartador was sharp. He noticed that something about Stephen's sword had changed since the last time they fought. "So that's why you're so confident even when you're outnumbered. You found a new weapon. Without it, you're nothing." "I didn't have an opportunity to confront you in the human realm, but the situation's different now. I can't let you go. Even if I don't use my weapon, I can still kill you." True to his word, Stephen sheathed the sword. Tartador was dumbfounded. Where was his confidence coming from? Stephen subtly activated the void technique, and the slits on his palms parted. At Tartador's angle, he couldn't see the changes in Stephen's hands. In his eyes, his enemy had left himself wide open. Tartador released a storm of blinding aura from his weapon. The ghost fire Stephen encountered in the mountain cave used his newly refined sword as its host. When he infused his spiritual energy inside the sword and it came in contact with the ghost fire, it was like a navigation map appeared in his mind. The ghost fire had mapped out the opening in Tartador's attack with one glance. Stephen stepped slightly to the right, and the storm of aura swept past him, missing him by a hair. Tartador assumed it was a fluke. He condensed his skull and tossed it at Stephen. Fire burned in the skull's eye sockets. When Stephen's gaze fell on the flames, his surroundings blurred. Death and gore consumed his senses. If he hadn't experienced the Ascender's trial, he might have fallen into Tartador's trap. The skull had the ability to interfere with the spiritual world, but it didn't matter what the illusion it conjured. Nothing could be scarier than his trial. Stephen condensed 2 spears with his inner energy and threw them at the skull. It opened its mouth and crushed them into fragments. He used the ice dragon's spiritual energy and manifested a storm of ice and snow. It obstructed Tartador's vision. While he was distracted, Stephen increased his speed and closed the distance between them. When Stephen's fist landed square on Tartador's chest, he staggered and almost lost his balance. His sword was useless. Stephen somehow dodged every strike. Tartador abandoned his weapon and fought with his bare hands. This was the opportunity Stephen was waiting for. He grabbed Tartador's wrist the next time he attacked. Tartador didn't notice anything strange about his grip. Just as he was about to forcefully pull away, his energy flowed out of him like a broken dam and into Stephen's palms. Even his blood was draining rapidly. Seconds later, Tartador became a sack of shriveled flesh. His death attracted the Asoras' attention, but Davos ordered them to stay put and not engage with Stephen. The slits on Stephen's palms had absorbed Tartador's energy, blood, and cultivation. It also had a purification feature. An Asora's blood contained poison, but once it was purified, once it passed through the slits. There was no time for anyone to process what had just taken place. The battlefield was ever-changing. Amanda and the orcs had reached a height where they were outside the range of the explosion. They instructed the martial artists to mount their beasts and ascend as fast as they could. The orcs dropped the artillery shells, and the canopy erupted in flames. Davos used his energy to form a shield around the Asoras in the nick of time. Even though the Asora King had given him his divine armor and weapon, he alone wasn't enough to take down the beasts and human cultivators on his own. The more he used his sword, the faster his energy drained. Spence, Kagan, and Drake ran to his side. The bird-type beasts are too fast, and it's hard to tell who's carrying ammunition. Unless we get down from the canopy, this is the end of our species. The chiefs weren't afraid of death, but they couldn't watch the Asoras disappear from this realm. A heavy burden fell on Davos' shoulders. There was no way out. His gaze swept over the beasts and fell on Killian. The celestial beast is their commander. If he's killed, we might have a chance to escape. The chiefs found Killian in the crowd. There were thousands of beasts around him. They weren't just for show. Even if Davos succeeded, Stephen would take over as commander. It's too dangerous. You represent the Asora King. It's over if you fail. You don't understand. Most of our people have been killed. If I don't avenge them, then I don't deserve this armor. Davos brandished his sword and charged at Killian. Before he could get close, the beast unleashed thousands of energy waves in his direction. The orcs dropped the rest of the artillery shields. The explosions increased exponentially. The canopy burned to a crisp. Leaves and wood turned to ashes. At this moment of life and death, the Asora King's light enveloped some of the Asoras and moved them to another space. He was so fast that no one noticed in the middle of the chaos. The remaining Asoras perished with the divine tree. Davos was the only one left. Stephen knew Killian was more than capable of handling him on his own. The ice dragon flew past the clouds and brought Stephen's team back to the ground. Have you decided which realm you want to go to? What do you think about the Asora realm? The Asoras are gone, and the beasts have taken over. Gabriel considered Stephen's question. The barren landscape and difficult terrain made him hesitate. He was more inclined to take Carson up on his offer and live in luxury at the imperial court. After some deliberation, Gabriel decided to stay in the Asura realm temporarily. He could always use the reversal array and cross over to another realm when he felt like it. I'll stay here for a while and decide on my next destination later. In that case, I'll give you a few mines. They're full of energy-rich ores and crystals. They were a gift from Killian. The sky flashed, and Davos fell like a kite with a broken string. His armor and sword transformed into streaks of light that disappeared into the clouds. The Asura King had given up on him. Killian condensed a cloud of black mist. It wrapped around Davos, and his body disintegrated. He turned to dust and drifted away in the wind. Before leaving, Stephen left Gabriel and Warhawk's army in the Asura realm. They weren't that many orcs. It would take them years to introduce technology to the beasts. The artificial martial artists would speed things up. Garon's economy recovered at an astonishing rate. The 9 states' financial group and Warhawk's business associations occupied half of Garon's port. There was nothing more for Stephen and Kim to do except collect dividends. After they went back to Annapolis, Stephen had a feeling that he was being monitored. Their villa was close to the military, and it was considered the safest residence in the entire country. But to be on the safe side, he consulted Wes and Aston. Have you noticed anything unusual around the house? Like unauthorized aircrafts? They exchanged confused glances. After taking down Tempest Citadel and the Asuras, peace had been restored to the world. Are you concerned about the villa's security? There are security guards on duty 24 hours a day. They haven't reported anything strange. Stephen had reached the late stage of the Red Dust Immortal realm, and his senses had become much sharper. If he couldn't pinpoint his stalker's location, that proved how skilled they were. Wes and Aston headed out to inform the Leviathan unit to dispatch a team of elite members to guard the villa. The increased security did nothing to alleviate Stephen's concerns. He was worried about Kim and Valeria. He took a seat on the couch and summoned the iridescent dragon. Your perception's better than mine. Do you sense anything out of the ordinary? Isn't Annapolis the safest city in the country? What do you need from me? You never know. I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching me. The sunshine and warm weather could brighten anyone's mood, but the murderous intent in the air was unmistakable. The iridescent dragon flapped its wings and reached out with its mental energy. There were too many martial artists and defensive arrays set up in the city. It was hard to distinguish friend from foe. Kim came over with a bowl of salad, unaware of the danger. I'm so bored. I'm not used to having nothing to do. A vacation is nice, but I'd like to have at least one project to work on. Your business is developing well in Cadus and Garon. You don't have anything to do except wait for the profits to enter your accounts. I know, but I just feel like there's nothing to do. I have so much free time on my hands. I guess there's no choice. Let's go to the... Before the words mall and shopping could come out of her mouth, Stephen interjected. How about getting involved in social welfare organizations? He rambled a list of examples to divert her attention away from the mall. Kim had spent the past 2 days lamenting her lack of work. He was dragged to the mall and became her personal bag carrier. Spending time together was nice and all, but going out when a stalker was on the loose wasn't the best idea. Fortunately, their conversation was cut short when a group of security guards came into the living room to deliver an envelope they found at the gate. Whoever had left it there couldn't have been an ordinary person. They had come and gone without a trace. The guards nervously handed the envelope to Stephen. They were on patrol at this hour, and they'd let an intruder bypass their security and trespass on private property. This was a grave oversight. If the Sovereign wasn't happy with them, they might be sent to another department as early as tomorrow. Stephen was oblivious to their concerns. He opened the envelope and took at the photo inside. It was a picture of a salamander in the forest. Based on the scenery, this photo had been taken in the suburbs of Annapolis. He was all too familiar with the salamander. It was Tempest Citadel's divine guardian beast. Kim leaned over to take a look. What's that? A beast? No, it's just a scene from an upcoming movie. The photo didn't contain any more clues, so Stephen changed the topic. His life had been peaceful ever since he came back to Annapolis, but the danger was never too far. He did his best to convince Kim and Valeria to stay home for the time being. When the sun slipped below the horizon, the murderous intent in the air became more pronounced. Stephen leaped onto the roof and scanned the premises. A shadowy figure appeared behind him without a sound. How have you been, Mr. Adams? It wasn't that hard to find you. My trip to Annapolis wasn't wasted. The person who'd been following Stephen and Kim for the past few days was the leader of Tempest Citadel, Thorin Ambrose. The decisive battle in Garon had drained his energy, and he'd also sustained serious internal injuries. If it weren't for the salamander, he would have died in battle. Stephen steeled his expression and calmly turned around with a racing heart. Mr. Thorin, it's a pleasure to meet you. You know what they say, fortune follows disaster. It's only a matter of time before you revive your faction. Thorin laughed. You're a hypocrite through and through. If you want to wipe out a martial arts faction, you should have made sure no one was watching. How long are you going to keep up this farce? On the day Tempest Citadel fell, a group of internal members on patrol had witnessed Stephen freeing the Ascenders from their cocoons and transmitting the scene back to Thorin in the midst of battle. Thorin was skilled, but he couldn't hide his presence at the villa. Murderous intent rolled off him in waves. The security guards surrounded him and prepared to attack. Once the Sovereign gave the order, he'd be erased from existence. Stephen held up a hand, signaling for them to wait. Kim and Valeria were at home. Not just any random martial artist could have become the leader of an ancient martial arts faction. If Thorin slipped past him and caused an explosion inside the house, Kim and Valeria's lives would be in danger. Since we're on the same page, then let's stop beating around the bush. What do you want? Revenge? Thorin's goal was naturally to avenge his faction. As the saying goes, every injustice has its debtor. The Azores had escaped back into their realm. It was unrealistic for them to chase after them. Gabriel's whereabouts were unknown, and it was impossible to find him in the sea of people. Stephen was the only realistic target. Wes and Aston landed on the roof and unsheathed their blades. Mr. Adams, just say the word and we'll make quick work of him. Thorin wasn't fazed even though a multitude of inner energies had locked onto him. I want to fight you one-on-one. My divine guardian beast is targeting chemical factories, power stations, and other similar places around the city. If it detonates them all at once, well, you get the picture, don't you? Millions of people will meet their end tonight. How many friends and family can you protect? Stephen couldn't refuse when the city was at risk. He mounted the ice dragon and it flew towards the suburbs. Wes, Aston, and the other guards escorted Kim and Valeria to a secret base owned by the military. The base would be intact even if it was attacked by a nuclear bomb. The ice dragon followed Thorin to an empty clearing. It was late in the evening, and there was no one in sight. As Stephen and Thorin took out their swords, the three dragons circled the sky to search for the salamanders, but there was no sign of it. The city was big, and it could have easily hidden behind one of the skyscrapers. Thorin made the first move. He closed the distance, leaving behind a series of afterimages, and attacked without hesitation. Stephen dodged every strike with ease. Ever since the ghost fire refined his weapon, he had access to its extensive knowledge of sword techniques and martial arts manuals. Thorin pierced the soil with the tip of his sword. The ground trembled with the fluctuations in energy. Purple pillars of light broke through the cracks and formed a cascade of reflective screens. Stephen shattered them with one strike, but the instant the fragments caught his reflection, a deep gash tore across his chest and blood stained his clothes. He stepped back and condensed a barrier of inner energy. Thorin lifted his hand with a grin. You can't see through such a simple technique. Let me demonstrate it again. A few more screens shattered. The moment Stephen saw his cracked reflection in the shards, bone-deep lacerations appeared on his skin. If he hadn't broken through the late stages of the Red Dust Immortal realm, his bones would have been shattered. His life had been connected to the light screens, but he couldn't understand how. Stephen used his sword's aura to condense a gust of wind to force Thorin away from the screens. It's too late. The screens are more fragile than glass. Your reflection's been caught in the light. There's no way out. Thorin threw out a wave of energy, and more screens shattered. Stephen doubled over, coughing up blood. Felt like his insides had gone through a grinder. No wonder the Ascenders from Phantasma Isle had vanished during the final battle. Thorin was a formidable opponent. He alone carried the weight of his faction. Stephen's beasts reacted quickly. The threadworms dug a deep pit, and the ice dragon froze the screens before tossing them inside. The threadworms sealed the entrance. If Thorin wanted to destroy the screens again, he'd have to burrow deep into the dirt. Stephen pulled out the Book of Destiny with a shaky hand and flipped it to the first page. Light filled the clearing. The sacred manual existed in legends. Even Thorin had never seen one of its volumes in person. He didn't know what the book was, but he could sense that it was extraordinary. Is that the martial arts manual? That's none of your business. Tempest Citadel has become a thing of the past. Your faction will end with you. Symbols and patterns glowed on the page, and every technique Thorin had learned in his life appeared in Stephen's mind. He imitated Thorin's gestures and inserted the tip of his sword into the soil. A cascade of purple light screens surrounded Thorin. They shattered with one sweep of Stephen's sword. Blood gushed out of the wounds on Thorin's body, and his aura withered. This was a secret technique passed down in Tempest Citadel, and only the leader had access to it. Thorin's reflection had been caught in the light, trying his life to the screens. There was nowhere to escape. He concentrated his energy on his sword and rushed at Stephen. Sparks flew when their weapons clashed. Both of them had sustained heavy injuries, and blood splashed the ground with the slightest movement. The explosive aura when the swords met pushed them back in opposite directions. Their inner energy had been thrown into disarray, and their stamina was reaching their limits. Thorin wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. How dare you steal my faction's technique? If this gets out, every ancient faction will hunt you down. During ancient times, stealing techniques from another faction was considered taboo. These traditional principles held no value in contemporary times. Only an antique like Thorin upheld principles from an era long gone. Stephen didn't have the strength to reply. He gestured to the 3 dragons in the sky. They dove in unison as the threadworms sung on their tails. Thorin didn't have much strength left either, but his rich combat experience gave him an advantage. He instinctively dodged every attack. He coated the tip of his sword with his own blood and drew a strange pattern on the ground. A burning sensation flared from the wound on Stephen's chest. 6 markings branded his skin. You've become a fugitive of the 6 realms. I'd like to see how long you can hide and how many of your companions will die trying to protect you. Just as the dragons and threadworms were about to attack again, a phantom of a salamander condensed in the clouds and wrapped its tongue around Thorin. It swallowed him and disappeared into the darkness of the night. The battle ended as abruptly as it began. Stephen still didn't know what Thorin was after. The ice dragon flew him to the military administration building in Annapolis. The Leviathan unit's leader, Liam, Ezra, and the Empyrean Circle crowded around Stephen, anxiously assessing his condition as Dr. Dalton and his team connected him to various machines and devices. The Leviathan unit's leader was an expert in medical treatment. Your internal organs aren't damaged, but the blood loss isn't severe. Take a few healing pills and rest for the next 3 to 5 days. Stephen pointed to the 6 brands on his chest. Don't you sense something unusual about these markings? There are weak spatial fluctuations coming from them. Everyone shook their heads in confusion. They had gently prodded the brands on his skin, but they didn't sense anything strange. Stephen connected them to his spiritual energy to transmit the sensation. The Leviathan unit's leader had numerous years of experience. He grasped the true identity of the brands. Thorin used the spatial positioning technique to transmit your location to the realm surrounding ours. Knowledge of space-time and the universe were limited in modern times. Aside from the Asura realm, which had recently attempted an invasion, there was no information on the other realms. The 5 ascenders from Phantasma Isle and the 4 who were trapped inside Tempest Citadel were no longer around to confirm. The Leviathan unit's leader could only speculate. According to legend, there are 6 realms adjacent to one another. They're known as the 6 paths of reincarnation. Aside from the human and Asura realms, there's also the Sanctum realm, Revenant realm, Bestia realm, and the Elysian realm. These legends are outdated, so there are probably minor adjustments to their names, but their locations haven't changed. When martial artists of our world reach the true immortal realm, most of them ascend to the Elysian realm. It's close, and the spatial barrier is weak. It's not common, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of them have figured out a way to travel back and forth between our realms. The Leviathan unit's leader was speculating based on information from a legend, but there had been records in ancient texts about frequent attempted invasions. The legend was accurate to a certain extent. What do these markings have to do with our neighboring realms? Stephen asked. The astral thief is a cultivator who can travel through space. He's also a fugitive across realms. Cultivators in other realms can sense the spatial fluctuations from your markings. They'll think you're the astral thief and hunt you down. With the ability to traverse space, it was easy to steal and hide in another realm. The brands from Thorin's technique couldn't be removed through any physical means. They were connected to Stephen's spiritual energy. As Stephen mulled over his predicament, he remembered the exorcists in the Asura realm. If their ancient techniques could remove the silver netting from the spatial rifts, maybe it was possible to remove the brands too. But the 3 exorcists he'd encountered were dead. He'd killed them with his own weapon. Stephen wondered if they were the last remaining members of their clan. The only way to find out was to visit the Asura realm again. When everyone heard that he'd be making another trip to the Asura realm, they didn't hesitate to accompany him. They volunteered at the same time. I'll go alone. All of you should stay in Annapolis. Thorin threatened to detonate in industrial facilities in the city. Focus on finding him and his divine guardian beast. Stephen waited 3 days for his injuries to heal before opening a spatial rift with his blade. He crossed over to the Asura realm by himself. The land was as desolate and barren as he remembered. It didn't even look that different, even after the flames of war ravaged the terrain. The ice dragon flew to the snowy peak where the 3 exorcists used to live. This was the only clue they had. The ice dragon circled the air several times, but they couldn't find the exact location of their home. The mountain looks different from before. Let's go down and take a look. Maybe the Asuras destroyed the summit to threaten the exorcists. The mountain was covered in snow, and from above, it was hard to make out the details. When the ice dragon landed and Stephen had a closer look, He realized that the environment had changed drastically. The flowers and trees had withered, and black smoke was coming from their remains. Stephen caught a slight movement from the corner of his eye. He reacted instantly. He flipped through the air and avoided the ambush. A group of creatures with decayed appearances surrounded him with sickles in their hands. "You thief! How dare you steal from our leader? If you follow us back to our realm, we'll leave your corpse intact. If not, then you'll burn in hellfire forever." Stephen held up his hands in surrender. "Wait, calm down! You have the wrong person!" He couldn't help but wonder if Tristan was the mysterious astral thief. How many people out there were as obsessed with treasures as him and actually had the capability to carry out possible heists? "Stop pretending," the creatures hissed. "We know who you are, astral thief. Don't think you can do whatever you want in the Revenant realm just because you can freely travel through space." They didn't see the culprit's face, but they'd followed the clues to the Asura realm and came across the young man exuding spatial fluctuations. What else could the culprit be if not him? Without waiting for a response, they brandished their sickles and launched another attack. Stephen knocked them back with his sword, but when it clashed with their sickles, an aura of death washed over him. His negative emotions were amplified, and he suddenly felt helpless and paralyzed in despair. His mind was a mess, and he couldn't focus on the fight. The ice dragon whipped up a blizzard to obstruct the creatures' view, but it didn't have any effect. The entire mountain was an illusion they'd set up to catch the astral thief. The young man's spatial fluctuations were a telltale sign of his identity. They had to bring him back alive. The creatures were relentless. The speed at which they swung their sickles was lightning fast. Stephen saw the attacks coming, but his brain couldn't catch up and he couldn't react fast enough. The iridescent dragon enveloped Stephen in a bubble, isolating him from the illusory mountain. It reduced the negative interference, and his mind regained some semblance of clarity. He rushed towards the creature and seized the wrists to devour them from the slits on his palms, but nothing happened. He wasn't sure if it was the illusion or the creature's body composition that interfered with his technique. Stephen leaped back and tried a different tactic. The necklace of beast fangs had been integrated into the hilt of his sword, but its abilities were still there. He manifested a pack of wolves. Their fur burned from the killin's flames. As the wolves blocked the sickles with their fur, the flames dispersed the aura of death. How is he drawing power from the beasts? Did their two species join forces to eradicate the Asuras? His ambition far surpasses this spatial plane. He is indeed a dangerous existence. The creatures assumed Stephen had invaded the Asura realm and annihilated the Asuras. Within minutes, the misunderstanding had deepened beyond repair. The creatures huddled in a circle and began to whisper. If the astral thief was the celestial beast ally, reinforcements would be coming soon. After a short discussion, they fled into the shadows, and the mountain returned to normal. The wolves disappeared, and Stephen fell to his knees, gasping for breath. His mind felt disconnected from his body. The snow was cold against his skin, but the sensation seemed abstract and out of reach. Find the exorcist's house! We can't stay here! The threadworm slithered around the snow to find the summit, but the peak had long since been flattened. A huge fight had broken out when the Asuras came to threaten the exorcists, and all that remained was dirt and debris. The threadworm slithered back down the mountain and told Stephen there was nothing left, but he didn't respond or react. He was leaning against the ice dragon, staring unseeingly at the snow. 1 second, Stephen was watching the threadworms glide up the mountain to look for the exorcist's home, and the next, he found himself face to face with the killin's intense golden gaze. Killian was crouching in front of him with his fingers clenched around a black mass radiating the aura of death. He tightened his grip, and it dispersed into wisps of smoke. Human minds are so fragile. Your beasts were in a panic when they brought you here. His voice brought Stephen back to reality, and his clarity returned in full force. He looked around and realized they weren't on the snowy mountain anymore. He was in the canyon on the Myriad Mountains, hidden behind one of the buildings. Killian stood up, and the leaders of the beast clans left Stephen's side to sit beside their god. If you're looking for your beasts, they're in your spiritual world. They attracted too much attention, so I asked them to stay hidden. Sure enough, Stephen sensed the threadworms and the dragon in his spiritual world. He felt their concern and reassured him that he was fine. Who exactly is Tempest Citadel's leader? Killian asked. These markings are like a curse. The person who cast it on you has a powerful will. It'll last a long time. He compressed a fraction of his spiritual energy and used it to brand yours. That's where the spatial fluctuations are coming from. Using his spiritual energy on an outsider had side effects. His body will gradually begin to weaken. If you want to wait it out, the curse will disappear naturally. As time passed, the curse would slowly lose its effects, but it could take months, years, or even decades. During this time, Stephen would be labeled as the astral thief, and the six realms would pursue him relentlessly. And it wasn't just him who'd be affected. His pursuers would also come after his family and friends. I can't wait that long. Thorin holds a grudge against me. I can't protect my people from beings from another realm and deal with them at the same time. Killian turned to the other beasts, and they put their heads together to find a solution. The leader of the nine-tailed foxes stepped forward with a suggestion. The species was known for their high intelligence. They even surpassed humans. I don't know if there are any living exorcists around, but the three were killed and buried in the village where the spatial rift appeared. If you find their bodies and temporarily return their souls, you'll have a chance to ask them how to remove the curse. It'll only take a few minutes. That was easier said than done. The cycle of life and death was the most basic law of nature. If Killian forcefully used his power to break the cycle, there was a risk of severe backlash even if he wasn't bringing back the dead back to life. Stephen didn't want him to risk his life for him. Why don't you teach me the technique instead? Once we find their bodies, I'll handle the rest myself. It'll be easier if I do it. Stephen was about to protest when Killian interrupted him. We'll talk about this again when we find their bodies. A group of beasts left the canyon and headed down the mountain to search for the exorcists. Under Killian's incessant urging, Stephen stayed in the Myriad Mountains. His safety was guaranteed with thousands of beasts protecting him. The creatures from the Revenant realm weren't about to let this go easily. The second they confirmed from the celestial beasts that he was on good terms with the astral thief, they went to the Myriad Mountains to confront him. Coincidentally, they ran into a group from the Sanctum realm who were there for the same reason. Both parties trekked up the mountain side by side and went straight to the canyon. The residents of the Revenant realm reassembled decayed humans, while the bodies of the Sanctum realm's residents were in a gaseous state covered in fire. Killian went out to meet them with the leaders of the beast clans. Stephen followed them. I assure you that this man is not the astral thief. The Asuras were scheming to take over the neighboring realms, and he helped us take them down. He's made significant contributions to maintaining the peace between our realms. Killian's tone was firm and left no room for discussion. But the groups from the Revenant and Sanctum realms weren't easily swayed. They were here on an important mission. The astral thief had stolen something from their superiors. If they couldn't bring him back, they were sure to have severe consequences waiting for them back home. We aren't denying his contributions to maintaining peace, but it doesn't prove that he's not the astral thief. He has the ability to cross realms, and there are spatial fluctuations coming from him. Human cultivators are mediocre, but they're sinister, cunning, and full of tricks. This is common knowledge among the 6 realms. Stephen never thought there'd come a day where he'd be misunderstood as a thief. His hands weren't clean, but he definitely wasn't a thief. I suggest you find definitive proof before accusing others of crimes they never committed. You're confident for a criminal. Is it because the celestial beast is on your side? He might be protecting you now, but his influence doesn't extend to the human realm. If you really are innocent, then come back with us. We'll investigate and let you go if we find out you're not the astral thief. Stephen had no intention of following them back to their realms. Their words couldn't be trusted. Neither side was willing to yield. The conversation ended there. The groups from the Revenant and Sanctum realms looked ready to pounce on Stephen and take him back by force, but they were on the celestial beast territory. It wouldn't be wise to make an enemy out of God. Killian didn't want to make enemies with neighboring realms either. He let the 2 groups stay on the mountain while they looked for the exorcists' bodies. The search went rather smoothly. The village had been destroyed, but the 3 exorcists were buried beneath the rocky terrain more than 30 feet deep into the earth. Their bodies were perfectly preserved. The more powerful a cultivator was when they were alive, the harder it would be for their bodies to be damaged. As soon as their bodies were retrieved, the beast set up an array with 7 lamps. Yin energy was strongest on the night of the full moon, which happened to be today. They were pressed for time, so Killian insisted on casting the technique himself, even though Stephen was concerned about the backlash. Killian gave the groups from the Revenant and Sanctum realms permission to watch. Jumping to conclusions won't get your treasures back. Killing the innocent isn't the key to resolving the issue. As long as you can prove that he's not the astral thief, we'll leave and report this to our superiors word for word. Killian nodded and went up to Stephen. He kept his voice low. When the exorcist souls return to their bodies, they retain their spiritual energy from when they were alive. Don't provoke them. You need their help. I think it's a bit too late for that now. I'm the one who killed them. Their senses are sharper than most cultivators. They sensed my presence right before they died. It's a risk you're going to have to take. The 7 lamps sparked to life as the light of the moon shone on the exorcist bodies. Their souls appeared in a phantom of themselves. They gradually solidified and merged with their bodies. The exorcist's eyes flooded open, and they sat up in a daze. It took them a minute to realize that their souls had been summoned back to their bodies after death. Luan let out a sigh. There are people looking for us even in death. Killian gestured to the brands on Stephen's skin. You have at most 10 minutes before your souls leave your bodies. If you have a request, let us know. All we ask in return is to remove these markings. Luan, Drew, and Rio inspected the brands. It didn't look that difficult to remove. A sudden death always left behind regrets. The exorcists were no exception. It was ironic that they had to save the person who killed them for another chance at life. Luan patted Stephen's shoulder with a smile. Let bygones be bygones and start over. We won't hold it against you. I noticed your companion from last time was an artificial human. Can you create 3 bodies for us? The groups from the Revenant and Sanctum realms began to whisper. Human cultivators were weak, but their technology was so miraculous that they could defy the heavens and change their destinies. This was how the universe kept itself in balance. Everything came with a catch. I can do that for you, but it'll take some time, Stephen said. Your souls were brought back to the Asura realm. I don't know if you'll last that long. Then it's settled. You don't have to worry about that. We'll integrate our souls with yours. Luan gently poked Stephen's forehead with his finger. It felt like a burning needle had pierced his skull. 1/10 of his soul was extracted and integrated with the 3 exorcists. Killian eyed them cautiously. It was risky for a cultivator to let outsiders into their spiritual world. The exorcists were capable of breaking his mind, but this was a risk he had to take to remove the curse early. No one knew how the exorcists did it, but after some time, the markings disappeared along with the spatial fluctuations. Luan went over to the groups from the Revenant and Sanctum realms. His aura was much stronger than before. He'd merged with Stephen's soul, and it was by no means weak. He's not the astral thief. He can't travel between realms without external assistance. They believed Luan's judgment. The exorcists were widely known among the 6 realms. They didn't have offensive abilities, but rendering energy useless gave them a significant advantage in a fight with cultivators. Even residents of the Revenant and Sanctum realms would have a hard time defeating them. Exorcists are well-respected cultivators. If you 3 are vouching for him, then this matter ends here. No matter how important it was to catch the culprit, finding a scapegoat was not the answer. They left to search for traces of the real astral thief. After Luan, Drew, and Rio linked their spiritual energies with Stephen's soul, he grasped the mechanics behind their techniques. Regular cultivators fought with their inner energy, but exorcists absorbed and neutralized it. Given the natural differences between their foundations, there was no guarantee that he'd ever be able to use their techniques. Peace returned to the Myriad Mountains. Fortunately, the backlash from bringing the exorcist souls into their bodies after death wasn't that severe, because they'd integrated themselves into Stephen's soul, which bypassed the laws of nature. By casting, the technique did drain a considerable amount of Killian's energy. The stability of his existence was dependent on his energy reserves. If he let it drop to 0, his life would come to an end and he would have to wait for his next awakening. He left to replenish his energy after Stephen's curse was removed. It wasn't every day Stephen visited the Asura realm. He went to check on Gabriel and Warhawk's army. Not much time had passed, but the artificial martial artists had introduced quite a bit of technological advancements to the beasts. Stephen didn't want to keep them here any longer than necessary. He asked Gabriel to send them back to the human realm. When Killian appeared a few days later, Stephen went to find him to discuss the future of the Asura realm. While they were talking, they came across a young man in sunglasses. He looked out of the place. Is that a beast who shifted into human form? Stephen whispered. No, he's not a beast or an Asura. The man turned to look at them. The celestial beast has a good eye. I heard the beasts are constructing a city. I came to take a look. When he took off his sunglasses, his features resembled Tristan's original appearance when he was young. Stephen wondered if they were related by blood. Killian clenched his fists, and the pressure around the man increased by several thousand times. If the man was an ordinary person, he would have been pressed into the ground. He calmly sauntered over to them as if nothing had happened. I'm Theory Fiore, the astral thief. This city isn't that bad, but it's far from the human realm. There's nothing to steal. Stephen was about to say something when the voices of the 3 exorcists echoed in his mind. Choose your words carefully. He can travel through space. If you provoke him, who knows what he'll do to your friends and family? No one knows what he's capable of. This is the Asura realm. Let the celestial beast handle him. Stephen wisely kept his mouth shut and left the talking to Killian. Some of the beast's valuables have gone missing. I suppose you're the culprit? Yes, it was me, Thierry admitted, looking Killian in the eye and daring him to make a move. I took a string of pearls and a golden lamp. They look fancy, but they're useless in battle. Do you want them back? Killian didn't take the bait. Forget it. Consider them my gift to you. Don't harass the beasts again. You're calmer and smarter than other cultivators I know. I wasn't planning to stay for long. Thierry looked at Stephen. I came here to follow you back to the human realm. I haven't seen my student in a while. You know Tristan Verity, right? Take me to him." Stephen wasn't surprised that they were teacher and student. Both of them were obsessed with treasures. Even if he pretended not to know Tristan, Thierry wasn't going to take no for an answer. Stephen said his goodbyes to Killian and opened his facial rift with his blade. He went inside with Thierry. After recovering from their life-and-death battle with Tempest Citadel, Tristan and Zane had moved to a villa on the outskirts of Annapolis. It was close to the training grounds. When Tristan opened the door, his eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Fiore, is it you? I haven't seen you since ancient times. You're still alive." Stephen never thought he'd hear Tristan address someone else with honorifics. It seemed the saying, "A master for a day was a father for the rest of his life," was true. Thierry was an unusual existence among the ancient martial artists. Everyone hated thieves, but he was the exact opposite. He'd stolen and learned almost every secret martial arts manual from the ancient factions. He'd broken through to the true immortal realm in one go with sheer amount of power contained in the manuals, and after ascending, he continued to steal from other realms. The first thing Thierry noticed when he met Tristan again was the change in his body. "What happened to you? In our line of work, our priority is to retreat when we encounter situations we can't handle. You couldn't even protect your real body. You still have a long way to go before you surpass me." Tristan shrugged. "It couldn't be helped. Enemies are everywhere in the world of martial arts. They caught me when I was least expecting it." Melandrew and Rio reached out with their auras to assess Tristan's body. "Is human technology that advanced? We've been underestimating you all this time. Can you create a body like his?" "I've already made arrangements," Stephen said. Thierry casually tasted the food prepared on the table and savored their taste. He'd made many enemies in his long life, and he was constantly on the run. It was rare to have a moment of peace. "Are you planning on staying in the human realm?" Stephen asked. "With you here? I saw what happened in the Myriad Mountains. You almost became the Sixth Realm's enemy. Very few people have seen your face. If you keep a low profile, no one will notice you." Thierry was always on the move. He wasn't ready to settle down yet. He had something more important to take care of. He took out an envelope with golden embroidery and opened it. There was a teleportation array drawn using strange symbols. The Mystic Covenant sent out 10,001 invitations across the Six Realms to participate in their recruitment. They'll be selecting members to join their expeditionary team. They're a martial arts faction with a transcendent status. They don't belong to the Six Realms. Think of it like an organization of cultivators from around the universe. Their goal is to eliminate factors that threaten the stability of space or the laws of nature. For example, the astral thief. It was true that there was always someone better. Thierry's explanation broadened Stephen's horizons to a whole new level. It was hard to imagine how powerful the Mystic Covenant was. Those who became members of the expeditionary team had the authority to exert pressure on other realms. Thierry had spent a great deal of effort to steal an invitation. He'd originally wanted his student to participate. If Tristan was selected, he would have become his personal spy, making it easier for him to avoid capture. But not only had Tristan lost his real body, he'd spent thousands of years asleep in his tower. The foundation of his cultivation was no longer what it used to be. Thierry placed the invitation in front of Stephen. "Are you interested in competing? There's no pressure. It doesn't matter if you fail." Stephen looked at the golden invitation and then at Thierry. "Shouldn't you think this through before inviting me? I haven't even broken through to the true immortal realm yet. The other participants will be ascenders." Thierry couldn't let his invitation go to waste, nor could he let his plan of planting a spy in the Mystic Covenant fail. Asking Stephen to participate was the same as putting his life on the line. Your cultivation is not a deciding factor. The purpose of the expeditionary team is to eliminate threats. Other than that, you're free to do what you want. Besides, human technology is known to be profound. It could come in handy. "This is a rare opportunity. If you're giving me this chance, there must be something you want in return. Why do you want me to participate?" "It's simple, really. All you have to do is join the expeditionary team and pass on their information to me." Joining the team was a hurdle in itself, but the probability of Stephen being chosen was very low. He supposed this would be good experience to meet other ascenders. "I'll participate, but before the recruitment begins, I'd like to deepen my cultivation." Thierry agreed. They relocated to a training ground nearby. There was an underground space 300 feet deep. The walls and floors were paved with alloy plates. The room was empty except for a control panel embedded in the wall to adjust gravity. Thierry took a seat on the floor. Strengthening your physical body isn't important at the late stage of the Red Dust Immortal Realm. The output of your strength is now your priority. You'll need to enhance your spiritual energy and create a world inside your body. Once it prospers, you can draw energy from it and use it freely. The internal world was different from a cultivator's spiritual world. The laws of nature didn't exist here. As for the spiritual world, It was more like a home for beasts who'd signed blood contracts. Stephen summoned the threadworms and the dragon from his spiritual world in case they were affected when he attempted to create a world. Thierry brought out numerous treasures from his storage. Using tools was a shortcut. It was fast, safe, and more efficient overall. I've been traveling across the 6 realms for many years, and I've come across a handful of treasures useful for cultivation. He motioned to a limestone slab. This is a recording of a cultivator opening a spatial plane. It'll help you gain some insights. When inner energy was infused into the slab, the surface became smoother and a scene came to life. It was a computer monitor. A cultivator with a large axe in his hand was tirelessly swinging in the dark. One glance and Stephen could tell that every sword and close combat technique he'd learned in his lifetime would be able to block a single strike with a seemingly ordinary axe. The cultivator tore the darkness apart, and lightning enveloped the space. The boundary between the sky and ground became more and more obvious. The cultivator released waves of energy containing the basic elements of nature: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. An unprecedented downpour fell from the sky. Flowers, trees, birds, insects, and fish appeared on the ground. Stephen and Thierry were witnessing the process of splitting the sky and the earth. Perhaps this was also the fundamental state and the origin of the human realm. You're not at his level yet. Your world will need some time before it prospers. Comprehension of nature's basic elements will guarantee its stability. For example, you have an extensive understanding of the fire attribute, but not so much of the water attribute. If you create a world, there's a risk it'll be overrun by a sea of fire. Thierry gave Stephen a long list of advice off the top of his head. Whether he succeeded or failed would depend on his skill and comprehension. Stephen relaxed his body as much as possible and circulated his inner energy. He was interrupted when 3 figures appeared behind him. Can we separate for a while? I need to concentrate. Breaking through to the true immortal realm will depend on how far I get today. Relax, Luan said with a smile. Your mental energy is weak. If you're falling behind, we can help you. They wouldn't be leaving no matter what Stephen said, so he had to let them be. He condensed a storm of blades in the space inside him. They spiraled into a tornado. When they accumulated enough energy, they shot out and pierced the darkness. The swords weren't as strong as the cultivator's axe in the recording, but they succeeded in tearing the space. The cultivator's world was colorful and bright. Stephen's world was monotonous in comparison. There were mountains and lakes, but there were no living creatures in sight. While he was wondering whether he succeeded or not, Thierry's voice brought him back to the outside world. Tearing through space and creating a simple world is enough. It'll evolve slowly. As time passes, life forms will appear. How long will that take? If I don't break through to the true immortal realm, I won't stand a chance during the recruitment. Stephen concentrated his mental energy and willed his world to create life forms. It didn't work. He created this world, but that didn't mean he would suddenly be able to replace the natural laws. When Stephen opened his eyes again, 24 hours had passed. Creating a stable world on your first try is an achievement, Thierry said. Just wait patiently. As your perception and comprehension of the natural laws and basic elements deepens, life forms will thrive inside your world. Every breakthrough is a life and death trial for martial artists. One of the most common setbacks was failing to condense a stable world. As the world collapsed, their spiritual energy would drain out of them, resulting in a body without its consciousness. Stephen assessed his body's condition. Nothing much had changed. His cultivation was the same. When the life forms are born in your world, you'll become a true immortal, Thierry explained. I understand. For the competition, can you lend me some of your weapons? As it stands, I have no chance of being selected. Thierry rolled his eyes. Have you been influenced by Tristan? Are treasures the only thing on your mind? Even though he was grumbling, he still took out a vast assortment of weapons for Stephen to choose from. This was an expenditure equivalent to an investment. If Stephen was selected to join the expeditionary team, the intel he received would be his payment. During the next 2 weeks, Stephen spent most of his time in his eternal world trying to grasp the laws of nature and create life forms. He looked forward to the day when the forest thrives on his barren mountains, birds flew in the sky, and fish swam in the rivers. You're too impatient, Luan said. You can't accelerate or slow down the laws of nature. Everything is difficult at the beginning, but eventually life forms will be born, and your world will thrive. If you have nothing to do except wait around, why don't you solve our problem instead? Stephen left the training ground with a heavy sigh. The biochemical bodies had recently been completed. He made a call, and the finished products were delivered to his office at the Military Administration Building. The 3 biochemical bodies were young and attractive. Their hearts beat steadily and rhythmically. Their brains were in an unconscious state, waiting to be activated. Luan stopped Drew and Rio when they were about to enter the bodies enthusiastically. He didn't know much about human technology, and he worried that Stephen had secretly pulled some tricks. Do you install any devices in these bodies? We don't want to be threatened or restricted in any way. Don't worry, there's nothing like that. But because you're not your main bodies, you might not be able to restore to your original cultivation. Exorcists weren't fond of fighting and killing, so that didn't matter to them. The three of them separated from Stephen's soul and entered the bodies. He felt lighter the instant they left. Do you want to stay here or go back to the Asura realm? The human realm isn't that bad, but we're used to living in the Asura realm. Luan turned around and gestured to the window. The ripples in space shattered the glass, but a spatial rift didn't appear. A cool breeze drifted into the office. Stephen made a mental note to call someone to repair the window later. You have to be more careful with your body. You'll damage it if you exceed your limits. Going back to the Asura realm will be risky. I thought human technology was better than this. This technology wasn't created to strengthen the body. Its purpose is to extend life. Luan wasn't thrilled, but Drew and Rio didn't care where they lived. Starting a new life in a new realm was exciting. They couldn't open spatial rifts anymore, but that didn't mean their foundations had disappeared. They'd retained their fundamental techniques. As exorcists, there'd always be people coming after them, but now that they were in another body, very few people would know of their existence. This was their new lease on life. Stephen took Luan, Drew, and Rio to a luxury villa and went to find Thierry. The Mystic Covenant had sent 10,001 invitations, which meant that he'd have 10,000 competitors. It would be safer to bring someone along to watch his back. The first person who came to mind was Liam. He was talented, and he had experience in other realms. Thierry waved his hand dismissively. I went through hoops and hurdles to steal this one invitation. I don't have another, but you can try your luck at an auction in the Elysian realm. You have to be careful when you sneak in, though. Don't provoke anyone. Among the 6 realms, the human and Elysian realms were the most similar to each other. After human martial artists ascended, most of them went to the Elysian realm. It was natural for their civilization to have developed in the same direction. The inhabitants of the other realms were typically stronger, but they were also bloodthirsty. Hunters were one of the more rational cultivators. Stephen had yet to reach the true immortal realm, let alone ascend. Using his blade to open a spatial rift was risky. If there really was an invitation at the auction, how do I bid for it? Purple gold coins. They're the main currency in the Elysian realm. Stephen had all the information he needed. He left to make preparations for his trip. The orcs assumed that the blade they'd taken from Phantasma Isle's vault opened spatial rifts connecting to random realms, but Killian had told them that the blade was forged from the bones of beasts from the Asura realm. It could only open spatial rifts to the Asura and the human realms. If he wanted to attend the auction in the Elysian realm, he'd have to make some modifications. Stephen summoned the iridescent dragon. Can you ask the Ghostfire if it's possible to include an additional attribute to my blade? I need to travel freely through the 6 realms. Before it could respond, a ball of white ghost fire appeared above Stephen's head. Ever since the Ghostfire refined Stephen's sword, the iridescent dragon had been using it for its own purposes. The Ghostfire could integrate itself into any weapon or move independently, but without the sword it originated from, its power was slightly weaker. You think too highly of me. If it was that easy to open a spatial rift, the Asuras wouldn't have started a war at the first sign of a black hole. You're one of a kind, the iridescent dragon insisted. How many souls are born from a weapon? Shouldn't it be easy for you to engrave a teleportation array on a blade? There are many ways to travel through space. Not all of them require brute force. Stephen took out the Book of Destiny. It had many features, and one of them was the ability to analyze an entity's cultivation, techniques, and other characteristics. He used the book on Thorin during the fight and learned about Tempest Citadel's unique teleportation array. The Ghostfire hovered above the diagram and then drifted to the blade to examine the hill. It flickered in front of Stephen's face and flitted its flames. Engraving a detailed diagram onto such a small surface is beyond me. From what I understand, this is within your capabilities. Can you give it a try? Okay, but don't blame me if I ruin your weapon. The Ghostfire flew to the blade, and the sound of metal grinding against metal echoed in the room. The blade could penetrate space, so it was possible to make slight modifications. The Ghostfire proudly presented the finished product. It had embedded a gem on the hilt. The color of the gem indicates your destination. The Sanctum realm is black, the Revenant realm is purple, the Bestia realm is brown, the Human realm is orange, and the Asura realm is red, and the Elysian realm is white. It's not complicated. Think of your destination before you use the blade, and it'll open a spatial rift to that realm. The blade had been upgraded, and Stephen was ready to embark on a new journey. He entered the rift and found himself on a small road on the other side. Before he could figure out what was going on, he heard a commotion up ahead. A man with a parrot in his arms was running his way, and a group of pursuers were hot on his heels. Stop right there, you thief! That's Miss Vivian's pet! Stephen darted into the bushes and held his breath, waiting for them to pass. The Elysian realm was a higher plane. Most of its residents were ascenders. The weaker cultivators were most likely their descendants, who hadn't reached the true immortal realm yet. The thief with the parrot in his arms sensed Stephen's presence with one glance at the forest and assumed he was conspiring with his pursuers. The thief swung his sword without hesitation. Stephen ducked and rolled to the right after to avoid the second strike. He used the ice dragon's spiritual energy to freeze the thief's limbs. His pursuers caught up and carefully pulled the parrot with golden feathers from his arms. The man in the lead breathed a sigh of relief. "We would have been fired if you got hurt. Thanks for your help, sir. Can you come with us? Miss Vivian will definitely reward you." The man contained his curiosity and courteously extended an invitation. He noticed that Stephen's cultivation was pitifully low, but he didn't know who he was or why he was there. There was an unspoken rule in the Elysian realm that those who wandered alone were likely to have a strong family background. Before figuring out the other party's identity, one must be respectful and polite. Stephen couldn't gauge their cultivation. If he wasn't careful, they could kill him with a flick of their finger. He had no choice but to agree. "It was no problem at all. Sure, I'll come with you." Not far away was a carriage inlaid with dazzling jewels. A young woman was waiting for her bodyguard with a rabbit in her arms. She brightened when they returned with the golden parrot. "They stole my little parrot today, but what about tomorrow? Are you going to let them take me away?" The bodyguards didn't dare to meet her eyes. Big families had strict rules. They didn't hesitate to deal with people who failed to live up to their expectations. The woman's gaze fell on Stephen. "It's rare to meet someone like you. You didn't bring anyone with you when you left the house?" "Well, I haven't run into any danger yet." "I'm Vivian Bellantine. I'm the oldest daughter of the Bellantine family. Thank you for stopping the thief." "You're very welcome. You can call me Stephen. It's not convenient for me to disclose personal details." Stephen was glad he didn't stutter. If they found out who he was, there was a risk they would kill him on the spot. Vivian frowned. Introducing yourself was basic manners. Was he looking down on her? "You're not much of a talker, but that's fine. Here, take this card. There's money inside. Consider this a token of my appreciation." Stephen was surprised that the Elysian realm had bank accounts and a financial system. It wasn't that different from the human realm. He accepted the card. "Do you happen to have a map? Sorry, I didn't prepare for my trip." Vivian tossed him a token. It was similar to the holographic map from the Asura realm. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, they went their separate ways. When Stephen was out of earshot, she didn't hesitate to speak her mind. "Which family is that country bumpkin from? Is this his first time out in the real world? He doesn't even know basic etiquette." "Don't take it to heart," her bodyguard said. "His cultivation was one of the lowest I've ever seen. Think of the money and map as a charity." Stephen waited until Vivian and her bodyguard disappeared down the path before activating the token. The iridescent dragon appeared and examined the map. Many of its clan members were mounts of cultivators across the 6 realms, so it had a deep understanding of the 6 realms. The Elysian realm is divided into regions. It's thousands of times bigger than the human realm. Each region has more than 100 cities. The closest city to our location is 30 miles away. Distance wasn't a problem for Stephen, but the biggest issue was his identity. A weakling like him would attract attention wherever he went. "You're such a handful," the iridescent dragon complained. "Some of my clan members live in this realm. Let's go pay them a visit." Stephen mounted the ice dragon, and it flew towards the mountains nearby. As the divine guardian beast of the Tribulation sect, it had been years since it last came into contact with its clan. It wasn't as up-to-date as the iridescent dragon. There was a stone castle halfway up the mountain. Stephen assumed that the dragons lived here in their human forms. They'd be too big otherwise. His 3 dragons transformed into humans and followed him to the entrance. The guards didn't question their identities. They let them in when they sensed the 2 clan members' auras. An elderly man with gold-rimmed glasses was sitting beneath a towering tree. He was the prophet of the dragon clan. The iridescent dragon ran up to him and gave him a big hug. "It's been years since I last saw you. You've been gone for a long time. You even brought back friends. Who is this human cultivator?" "You're the prophet. Don't you know the answer?" The elderly man laughed. "Introductions are a formality." He turned to Stephen. "Mr. Adams, I've heard a lot about you. You've made a name for yourself in the human realm. Did you smuggle into the Elysian realm on behalf of someone else?" Your foresight is extraordinary. I'll be participating in the Mystic Covenant recruitment soon. I'm here to look for an invitation." The prophet thought Stephen was too naive. In the Elysian realm, true immortals were at the bottom of the hierarchy. Powerful cultivators were everywhere. He patiently gave him an explanation of the classification system. Cultivators who descended to a higher plane were classified by a new standard. People like Stephen, who hadn't ascended yet, were considered ordinary. Not every ascender's descendants had the potential for cultivation. The number of ordinary people in higher realms was quite large. "How long will it take for me to reach the true immortal realm?" Stephen asked. Strength and fate go hand in hand. The path to power is never-ending, but it's not necessarily a happy one. You're not like other cultivators. Before ascending, ask yourself if this path is meant for you. The prophet of the dragon clan had a unique ability to predict the future, but he wasn't as strong as the rest of the dragons. As one of the most important members of the clan, he had a high status and was well protected. "I'll give you an identity. From now on, you're my student." "What? There are so many young and talented dragons in our clan, but you're taking a human as your student?" the iridescent dragon exclaimed. "It's just a title. I won't be teaching him anything. Of course, I'm not doing this for free. The astral thief stole medicinal fossils from our clan, and I would like to have them back." Thierry and Tristan stole left and right with no shame, and Stephen was always caught in the middle. As their acquaintance, he had one of the worst reputations among the 6 realms. "I understand. After everything is over, I'll talk to him and get them back for you." Everything in the natural world was subjected to a cycle of life and death. To prevent certain rare herbs from going extinct, the Dragon Clan had sealed them in rocks. The herbs could be preserved for tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years. As the astral thief, a precious treasure like medicinal fossils would never escape Thierry's notice. He was a famous fugitive on the Mystic Covenant's wanted list. The prophet could have informed them of Thierry's location, but his death wouldn't get him the fossils back. The prophet gave Stephen a necklace engraved with a dragon totem. This was evidence that he was a student. Strength wasn't rare in the Elysian realm, but predicting the future was hard to come by. Typical residents of the realm would have to treat Stephen with respect if they saw his necklace. "The auction will be held 3 days from now in Minori City. I'll mark the location on your map. Whether you win the invitation or not will depend on your skill." Stephen thanked the prophet and left the castle with the 3 dragons. They constructed a simple wooden house as their temporary lodgings. Every inch of the land on the Elysian realm was filled with spiritual energy. He spent his free time cultivating, hoping his internal world to thrive as soon as possible. 3 days later, Stephen arrived in the bustling city and found the auction house. Minori City was as big and complex as a metropolis. If it weren't for the iridescent dragon's guidance, he wouldn't have gotten lost. The plaque of the entrance read, "Amethyst Auction House." The name was familiar. Stephen took out the card that Vivian had given him. Amethyst was engraved on the top left-hand corner. "I'm guessing this isn't a coincidence." Amethyst is one of the largest financial business organizations among Ascenders, the iridescent dragon explained. They have auction houses, pawn shops, banks, and other financial institutions under their name. They're a neutral group, and their only goal is to make money. They issued this bank card. The receptionist standing by the door walked over with a smile. He was observant and had noticed the prophet's necklace. "Welcome to the auction. It's about to start. Come on in." The receptionist led Stephen and the iridescent dragon inside and brought them to their seats. He gave them a pamphlet before leaving. There were around 100 people in the hall, and their clothes were decorated with their family's emblems. Stephen opened the pamphlet and saw a long list of exquisite items with fancy titles. The starting prices were shockingly high. His bank card had 20 million purple gold coins. It was more than enough to live a life of luxury, but it was too little to win a bid for any of the items. Stephen flipped through the pamphlet, but he couldn't find an invitation to the Mystic Covenant's recruitment. "I don't see it. Did we waste our time coming here?" "Even if it was here, you don't have enough money. Instead of looking for an invitation, you should focus on improving your cultivation. It doesn't matter who you bring with you to the recruitment. Anyone who isn't an ascender is an ordinary person in the higher planes, Liam included." The iridescent dragon thought it would be a better idea to ask the prophet for guidance. He wasn't unreasonable. If Stephen sincerely asked him for help, he would agree. A familiar face took a seat next to Stephen. It was Vivian Bellantine. "What a coincidence. We meet again." "Miss Vivian, are you interested in the items?" "I'm just here for the experience." Vivian's attitude had become much more polite. Stephen's necklace was hard to miss. His cultivation was low, but he was the prophet student. His potential was limitless. The auction began at 10 o'clock in the morning. The first item was a mirror with a starting price of 100 million purple gold coins. Humans had 3 souls and 7 spirits. The mirror could reflect the condition of each soul and spirit. It was useful for healing mental injuries. After a few rounds of bidding, the price was raised to 1.2 billion. The auction was different from what Stephen was used to. The competition wasn't that intense. Everyone was friendly and polite. The higher one's cultivation became, the calmer they were, and the less importance they placed on worldly possessions. The second item was an hourglass starting at 30 million. It could stabilize the flow of time in the Elysian realm. When it was brought to other dimensions, it could be used as a guide home. The third item was a robe worth 40 million. It could resist a fraction of the lightning from the heavens during ascension. The robe would be useful for Stephen when he reached the true immortal realm and had his trial, but he didn't have enough money. Vivian bid multiple times for an exquisite hairpin, but it went to someone else in the crowd. She wasn't expecting to bid today, but the hairpin had caught her eye. It was a shame she didn't bring enough money. "Miss Vivian, are you interested in exotic jewelry? I happen to have a few pieces with me. All of them were crafted by professional designers." Each realm contained varying amounts of energy. It was difficult for cultivators of higher planes to enter lower-grade realms without external assistance. Vivian had most likely never visited the human realm. Stephen took out a golden bracelet, necklace, ring, and hairpin. The value of precious metals was somewhat fixed. Whether the jeweler attracted customers or not depended on the designer's skill. Vivian's interest was piqued. She'd never seen jewelry like this before. "The craftsmanship is exquisite. I can't sense any fluctuations in energy. Where'd you get them from?" Stephen didn't have to think too hard to come up with an excuse. It was easy to fool those who'd never set foot in another realm. "My friend went out to train and found these pieces by chance. He had given them to me as a gift." "Sell them to me. I want all of them. They'll be perfect with the dress I picked out for the party tonight." Stephen placed the jewelry in her hand. "It's okay, just take them." They weren't rare treasures in the human realm. It was quite easy to get them. Vivian couldn't turn down his gift. She'd noticed that Stephen hadn't bid during the auction. It seemed he didn't have much money in his pocket. "I don't like owing other people favors. If you're interested in an item in the pamphlet, let me know. I'll get them for you. I'll ask my butler to transfer the money." The Bellantine family was wealthy and well known throughout the city. Their wealth came from cultivation resources. They had a dedicated and experienced mercenary team who searched for these resources across the realm. "Thank you, but I'm looking for an invitation to the Mystic Covenant's recruitment. They don't have it at this auction." Vivian gave him an incredulous look. "You want to participate in their competition? It's not as simple as it sounds. You could die." Stephen's aura placed him in the category of an ordinary person. Even if he was a student of the Dragon Clan's prophet and had limitless potential, he wasn't at that stage yet. The Mystic Covenant didn't set any restrictions. Anyone could participate, but most of them would be cultivators, not ordinary people. "A competition is a type of cultivation. I can't pass up the opportunity," Stephen said. "I can't stop you if that's what you've decided. You've come to the right place. Ordinary goods are auctioned off with money. Top-grade goods are sold in the form of missions. Wait patiently." 10 items had already been sold for a high price. Amethyst Auction House was popular among the masses. The organizer had gotten used to the hefty commission. The staff carried a heavy metal box to the stage. The audience began to whisper when they saw what was inside. It was an invitation to the Mystic Covenant's recruitment. The golden embroidery glowed under the lighting and emitted a holy aura. It was authentic. The host cleared his throat and made an announcement. "As you all know, the Mystic Covenant is holding a competition to recruit members to join the expeditionary team. They've sent 10,001 invitations across realms through various channels. With this invitation, you're free to participate. If you've selected to join the expeditionary team, you'll obtain an endless supply of wealth, status, and power. The value of this invitation is immeasurable." The staff carefully picked up the invitation and held it up for the audience to see. It was indeed a priceless treasure. "To win the invitation, you'll have to complete our mission in the shortest amount of time. There's a volcano at the highest peak of the Elysian realm. The Berserker's blessing lies beneath the magma. Bring it back and the invitation will be yours." The hall fell silent. This wasn't the first time they'd heard about this mission. Amethyst Auction House issued all kinds of missions on the mountain. In the beginning, cultivators used to rush to the mountain like a swarm of bees, but none of them had made it back alive. Stephen was confused by the silence in the hall. The invitation was a prized treasure. Why was no one taking on the challenge? He'd learned from Tristan that the more dangerous it was to obtain a treasure, the more valuable it would be. If things got complicated, he could just forfeit in the middle. The stares of the audience bore into Stephen's back as he went on stage and signed his name on the life and death contract. If he was killed during the mission, it wouldn't be the auction house's responsibility. Who's that? I've never seen him in this city before. I can barely sense his cultivation. Is he one of those ordinary people? Is he sacrificing himself to scout the mountain for his superior? I saw him talking to Vivian during the auction. Maybe the Bellantine family wants the invitation. Their business has been growing over the years. I heard their mercenaries are the strongest in their field. The hall was filled with assumptions, but none of them were right. Stephen was accepting the mission of his own free will. The host waited 5 more minutes. No one else signed their name. You don't have to make a decision right now. You have 3 days to accept the mission. The auction ends here. I wish everyone good fortune and prosperity. As the audience left the hall, the host handed Stephen a book with detailed information about the mountain. He was curious about this young man. For someone with his cultivation, this mission was no different from a death sentence. Stephen had many questions, but he couldn't ask any of them. His ignorance would leave a bad impression on the host to make him think that he'd taken on the mission as a joke. There are many young, ambitious people like you, but don't overestimate yourself. If you find yourself in a dangerous situation, prioritize your life over everything else. The Berserker's blessing has been buried beneath the magma for years. It's not going anywhere. Stephen thanked the host for his kind advice and followed the rest of the audience outside with the iridescent dragon. Vivian was waiting for him in the shade beneath a tree. As the oldest daughter of the Bellantine family, she had no responsibilities. This was her chance to have some fun. Are you stupid or just pretending to be stupid? There were so many people in the audience, but none of them signed their names. Why did you take on the mission? Do you know anything about the highest peak? Do you know what the Berserker's blessing is? Stephen didn't have an answer to her questions. He gave her an awkward smile. I really need the invitation. I was hoping I'd have a chance if I familiarize myself with the mountain. You're hopeless. There's no helping it. Let's go together tomorrow morning. You're coming with me? Don't misunderstand. I'll take you to the volcano, but the rest is up to you. Vivian waved goodbye and climbed into her luxurious carriage. When she disappeared down the street, Stephen and the iridescent dragon left to head back to their temporary lodgings. The Bellantine family's mansion had been built between a mountain range and the water. The air was fresh, and the environment was peaceful. Vivian's father was the head of the family. He'd been expanding the family business for years with ease. He never had any problems until now. He'd asked his subordinate to follow his daughter and protect her from the shadows. Apparently, she'd attended an auction today and agreed to escort an ordinary person to the highest peak. When Vivian strolled past the gate, her father waved to her in the garden. I heard you went to the Amethyst Auction House. Did you buy anything? Why would I randomly throw my money away? Vivian said shamelessly as she took a seat across from him. You know how frugal I am. I just went to take a look at the items. Her father set down his cup of tea and earnestly tried to persuade her to consider her marriage proposal to a bachelor from another wealthy family in the city. Why would I give up my life of freedom to settle down with a man? Cultivators have long lifespans. It doesn't matter when I get married. Vivian's father took a sip of tea to swallow his frustrations. His daughter didn't listen to anyone in the family, not even him. Why do you have to turn every serious conversation into an argument? There's a party tonight. The entire family will be there. If you don't attend, I'm freezing your cards. I'm your daughter, not your enemy, Vivian argued dramatically. There's no need to go that far. I was going to attend anyway. Her father changed the topic to the ordinary young man she'd met at the auction. He couldn't let his daughter associate with some poor kid with no status. I heard you volunteered to escort someone named Stephen to the highest peak tomorrow. Do you know how dangerous the missions from the auction house are? He gave me a gift, so I'm repaying him. Besides, he's the student of the Dragon Clan's prophet. What? The prophet took on a student? When? I don't know, but Stephen was wearing his necklace. I saw it with my own eyes. Vivian's father had a 180-degree change in attitude. Instead of telling her to stay away from Stephen, he was now planning to invite him over for a chat. If he could establish a connection with the prophet, their family would be invincible. If an ordinary person like him accepted the auction house's mission, maybe the prophet already predicted his success. Bring the mercenaries with you tomorrow. Vivian leaned back in her chair with a smug smile. That was fast. It took you exactly 15 seconds to change your opinion of him. This discussion is over. Go and get ready for the party. The next morning, Stephen went back to the city to meet up with Vivian. Her entourage seemed a bit too grand for a short trip to the mountains. There were off-road vehicles equipped with weapons and outdoor survival supplies. Aside from her bodyguards, there were also 20 mercenaries surrounding her. Stephen could sense that their cultivations were much higher than his. Vivian gestured to the vehicles. Let's head out. The mountain we're going to is far from the city. It'll take a few hours to get there. The cultivators weren't allowed to fly in the city or its vicinity. It was disrespectful to ordinary people, and it would also cause a lot of trouble for the city guards. Stephen looked out the window at the cityscape as the vehicles sped down the highway. It felt like he was back on Earth. He pretended to be lost in thought to deter Vivian from striking up conversation with him. Who knew when he would slip up and expose his identity? Aside from Vivian's occasional conversations with her bodyguards, most of the journey was in silence. They arrived at the foot of the mountain a few hours later. Vivian pointed at the abandoned homes nearby. Do you see those houses? They used to be vacation homes owned by wealthy families, but they had to give up on them because the mountain was too dangerous. I studied the book the host gave me, Stephen said. I remember it said the mountain's spiritual energy condenses into monsters and attacks outsiders. Is that true? Even after reading the book, there were many concepts he didn't understand. Yes, the monsters have special abilities, like rapid recovery, hardening, space-time interference, and so on. But they're not the only threats. The entire mountain is affected by spiritual energy. There are strange phenomena that happen at random intervals. Not too many people make it out alive. The Bellantine family's mercenaries were seasoned hikers. They chose a relatively safe path leading to the volcano at the snowy peak. As they passed through the dense vegetation, Stephen felt something or someone's gaze on them. He reached out with his aura, but he couldn't detect their location. Everyone stopped in their tracks when a flash of light appeared up ahead. Vivian's bodyguards surrounded her with weapons raised. Spheres of energy circled them. The unusual phenomena were more abstract than what the book had described. Stephen didn't have a chance to ask any questions before the spheres of energy attacked. His sword had no effect. It was as good as useless against entities with no physical bodies. A wave of dizziness washed over him. Don't come in contact with it, Vivian warned. You don't know what effect it'll have on you. It'll be troublesome if you're poisoned or your skin begins to rot. Can we fly into the air to avoid them? That will attract other phenomena and monsters. It won't be easy to fend them off in the air. The bodyguards and mercenaries combined their energy and condensed a whirlpool. It swallowed the spheres of energy, but there were more in the distance. Miss Vivian, we should head back down the mountain, the lead bodyguard advised. There aren't that many spheres left, Vivian protested. Won't we make it to the top if we continue up this path? We can't let you take that risk. If anything happens to you, your family will be devastated. The bodyguards and mercenaries crowded around Vivian, preparing to bring her back to the foot of the mountain. She was the heir of the Bellantine family. They couldn't let anything happen to her. The lead bodyguard turned to Stephen. Would you like to come with us? It'll be hard for you to reach the peak on your own, and even if you do make it, you'll have to dive into the magma to get the Berserker's blessing. This was only the beginning. Stephen would have to face much stronger opponents during the recruitment. I'll stay. Take care when you go down. Vivian gave him a map of the mountain. Stay safe. I hope we meet again. As they disappeared into the dense forest, the whirlpool absorbed most of the elemental phenomena in the area. Stephen summoned the beast and leaped onto the threadworms' backs. They glided along the path and used their speed to shake off the phenomena. The iridescent dragon landed on Stephen's shoulder. Don't you know how weak you are? Coming here is like asking for death. The Mystic Covenant's recruitment will start soon. What else am I supposed to do? Slowly improving your cultivation is much better than dying on some random mountain. As their heated argument escalated, the threadworms continued to advance up the mountain. The phenomena was more profound than the spiritual energy in the human realm. Even the knowledgeable iridescent dragon didn't know what to do. When the spheres of light appeared again, Stephen and the beasts imitated Vivian's team and condensed a whirlpool. The spheres of light were different from the ones at the beginning of the path. Not only were they not absorbed into the whirlpool, they also affected their mental state and energy. Left with no other option, the threadworms burrowed into the ground to dig a tunnel to the peak. The temperature of the sand and rocks was scorching high from the active volcano. Stephen returned the 3 dragons to his spiritual world and used the Killin's spiritual energy to try and absorb the heat. At a certain point, he reached his limit and had to stop. He was forced to rely on his body's natural defenses for the rest of the way. The threadworms moved quickly. They reached the peak in an hour. Stephen crawled out of the hellhole and flopped onto the snow to cool down. Steam filled the air. Now I know what it's like to almost be grilled like a piece of meat. There's so much spiritual energy in the Elysian realm that it's almost impossible to absorb it. The iridescent dragon appeared above him. Did you forget about the volcano right in front of us? The magma is much hotter than the rocks underground. If you swim around in there, you'll melt instantly. Not even your ashes will be left. Stephen had a feeling that if he couldn't overcome this obstacle, he would never break through to the true immortal realm. This was a challenge he had to face. Stephen lowered his body temperature and sorted through the equipment the threadworms had stored inside its stomach. He infused his inner energy into the weapons from Phantasma Isle's vault and sent them into the crater. The surging waves swept the weapons into a sea of magma. The heat transmitted back to Stephen. It felt like a kettle of boiling water had been poured into his brain. He collapsed onto the snow again to cool down. The threadworms piled snow on top of them with their tails. Weapons and equipment forged in the human realm can't withstand the energy in higher planes, the threadworms explained. Stephen remembered that Thierry had given him a pile of treasures before he came to the Elysian realm. He sat up and sorted through them. He picked up a 10-inch regular chunk of metal. It was heavy and weighed more than a few tons. Stephen used his energy to change the metal into the shape of a chain. He threw it into the magma. It didn't melt, but the heat traveled up the metal and made it harder to keep his grip on the other end. A muffled explosion sounded from the depths of the magma. Waves of energy struck the submerged part of the chain. What was that? Is there a beast inside the magma? No, the spiritual energy on the mountain probably created a guardian to protect the volcano from cultivators, the iridescent dragon said. The ice and flood dragons flew over the volcano to observe the magma. A man covered in flames grabbed the chain and dashed through the crater in 3 steps. Stephen lost his grip on the other end. The man used the chain like a whip. It crashed into the snow, leaving behind craters in the ground. Stephen dodged at the minute, narrowly avoiding being flattened by his own weapon. The ice and flood dragons whipped up a whirlwind and trapped the man inside. He waved his hand and dispersed the wind using his flames. Stephen condensed the aura in his sword and released it in a burst of energy. The man's flames flickered, but they weren't extinguished. The man threw out his fists, and a violent wave of heat struck Stephen's beasts. They tumbled off the peak. The iridescent dragon was small, and it was the only one who'd managed to dodge to the side. Stephen increased his speed and darted around the man, surrounding him with a series of afterimages. The man vaporized them without another wave of heat and followed up with a swing of the chain. Is there a way to restrain him? Stephen asked. With him here, we won't be able to get close to the crater or the bottom of the volcano. The iridescent dragon condensed a bubble, but the man easily popped it with his fist. There's nothing I can do. My specialty is mental techniques. He doesn't have a mind of his own. The man swung the chain again. Stephen leaped into the air to dodge, but the man moved like lightning. He tossed the other end of the chain towards him and tied him up. Stephen was thrown into the crater. Even the Killin's protection and his body's natural defenses, he wouldn't be able to survive more than 10 minutes in the sea of magma. He thought quickly and used his energy to transform the chain into a barrier. When Stephen hit the magma, the heat began to penetrate the metallic barrier. Even if he wasn't killed by the magma, the heat would be enough to roast him alive. There wasn't enough space to open a spatial rift with his blade, and there was a risk it would melt from the scorching temperature. The man covered in flames didn't chase after him. Maybe he'd already merged himself with the magma since the intruder was gone. The iridescent dragon's voice sounded in his mind. Get it together and dive to the bottom. Before you die, at least find out what the Berserker's blessing is, so you won't have any regrets. Stephen hadn't seen what happened to the other beasts, but if the iridescent dragon was in the mood to joke around, they were probably fine. He tried to surface, but the waves in the magma forced him back down. He could only dive to the depths. As he went deeper, a black pyramid came into view. A narrow crack was at the top, as if someone had forcefully removed the piece of rock. There's your way out, the iridescent dragon said. The pyramid can withstand high temperatures. You might survive if you hide in there. Stephen didn't need to be told twice. He removed the metallic barrier and squeezed through the narrow crack. The magma was contained overhead. The space inside the pyramid seemed to be isolated from the outside world. Stephen felt reborn as the cool and damp air dispersed the heat. The iridescent dragon tried to convince him to leave. You don't know what's in there. Why don't you give up the mission and go back to the human realm? We've come this far. I can't leave without the berserker's blessing. What if it's up ahead? Stephen tightened his grip on his sword and descended the spiral staircase. When he reached the bottom, the chandelier embedded in the wall lit up. There was a golden goblet at the center of the spacious room. Stephen went over and peered inside. 2 eyeballs soaking in wine met his gaze. The eye contact made his hair stand on end. His mind raced with questions. Was this the berserker's blessing? What had happened to the rest of the body? Why were the eyes soaking in wine? The carvings on the walls shifted and merged into one. A brawny man with a sword stepped out of the carving with a sword in hand. His eye sockets were empty. Young people these days are too reckless. They get worse with every generation. You're not even an ascender. If you're here on behalf of someone else, they should be aware of the risks. Stephen reached for the goblet, but the man was faster. He closed the gap in a split second, and Stephen had barely enough time to step back. The sword missed his neck by an inch. His skin stung from the rush of wind. He leaped into the air and threw a handful of artillery shells at the man. An explosion tore through the narrow space. The man didn't see it coming. The shockwave sent him flying, and he crashed into the wall. Fire and smoke enveloped the room. Stephen had reformed the metallic barrier right before the explosion. He landed on the ground unscathed. Before the man could regain his bearings, Stephen rushed to the center of the room and grabbed the goblet. The man slashed once with his sword. The wind dispersed the smoke and put out the fire. The pyramid was made of stone. There was nothing flammable in the room, so the flames didn't do much damage. Stephen had no intention of prolonging the fight. He opened a spatial rift with his blade and summoned the threadworms and the dragon back to his spiritual world before disappearing inside.